Here we are. The kingdom of man. Last week, this is our 3-part lecture series on the kingdom of man, the kingdom of God, and the kingdom of nature. Last week, we talked about the kingdom of nature. Welcome, friends. Let's jump straight into it. The kingdom of man. Man, his faculties of reason, of the intellect, at least this part of him anyway, were you could consider to be part of the realm of the serpent, the domain of the serpent. It was, when we are referring to today man, we are referring to what is purely man in man. The in-between, you could call it. And how that becomes vertical in history once we enter temporality. And so that faculty of reason gets co-opted because there's something in man that is noble, higher than the animal, and always has been made image and likeness of God. And so the reason is co-opted, is moved to contemplation. And that is the birth of man, really, as he truly is. As the in-between these two processes of necessity of the past, heredity, genes, and providence, as the mediator between them, in a sense. And so, from an evolutionary point of view, the human being is at the culmination, at least for the time being. Or, if it be evolution's purpose to raise its underlying instinct, that is, the serpent's guile, to self-awareness, it is no doubt true that humans are those creatures in whom this purpose takes place, this guile. Humans are the least instinctive and most intelligent being yet to appear on the stage of evolution. And it was by this virtue that their skill with tools and their intelligence that they wrested domination over the earth from the great Saurians of the past. In humans, the will to power, the moving force behind all evolutionary processes, has attained its highest level yet. Their sovereignty is undisputed. No rival remains, friends. In the use of tools through which their domination over nature has been made possible, they have advanced from the stone axe to the interplanetary rocket, from the hand spear to the hydrogen bomb. Yet all these represent nothing but steps along the way leading to the conquest and control of nature by sense-bound reason, facticity, horizontal. These steps on the path of progress all have in common that they are achievements of intelligence applied to the acquisition of power by means of perfecting the design and use of tools. Macht. A principle among two, pushing in nature the parasite, as we talked about last week. Macht, will to power, the serpent. All such attainments of technology, and this speaks to even today, of course, and that's the reason why AI is demonic. All such attainments lie on the same plane, namely that of the struggle for existence and the will to power. They are simply an intellectual extension of the instinctual behavior of animals. No essential moral distinction is to be made between the behavior of an ape hurling a coconut at the head of someone passing by and that of a pilot who dropped the pilot who dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The difference consists merely in the technology employed, the sum total of all technological development, along with the scientific research in mathematics, chemistry, physics, mighty physics, upon which it rests is simply natural evolution extended by humanity. The only difference being that its guide is now reason, not instinct. If humans were nothing other than the products of natural evolution, they would abide exclusively on the plane of Wildermacht and would persist in the application of all their faculties to this end. They would be completely submerged in the horizontally advanced evolution of the serpent, the horizontal surface facticity, surface sense, which empiricism bases all its postulations on. And they would have identified with that horizontal for all eternity. But, friends, there occurred a miracle in human history while swimming with this tide of progress, imbued with empirical and materialistic realism, which is something we just had in a participation mystique, you could say. Well, actually, no, this is before that. This is sort of being in the world. We have being in the world, which is this, it's just this, not exactly automatic, but it's a judgment and a direction. That's all it is. And whatever benefits that, whatever benefits or whatever gives pain, it's like the animal has world, but it doesn't have logos. Being in the world is a existential that we have. Anyway, humans arose and raised themselves above the plane of this natural evolution and this push of necessity, of instinct. They raised themselves above this very realism. But I wouldn't even call that realism, because the true real is outside, is the eternal, as we know. But a non-empirical idealism lit up. This took place long before the historical appearance of Platonism and Stoicism, or the Vedanta and Buddhism. That's all humanism. That's why we're talking about it. In principle, it occurred in the far distant past when someone first erected a stone altar upward on the vertical. Why? What possible use could that be? What possible utility? None. Doesn't cover you. It's not some marking stone. That's what, modern archaeology likes to always look for utility. But no, there is no use for this. What would you call it? Naive realism. This naive juvenile realism, really, of early man. The first altar of unhewn stone, all else the great religions, as well as the totality of humanity's idealistic philosophies, followed upon the erection of that altar, an act, standing up, waking up, an act that was to have far-reaching consequences. It was an action vertically opposed to the evolutionary process, or the automatic one, lying neither on level with nor in the direction of empirical materialistic realism. To what does the miracle of idealism appearing like a comet in the world of evolution attest? First and foremost, it points to the nobility of the human being. It bears witness in their deeper being, humans are not a mere product of this grinding serpentine necessitated evolution, because there's another development going on at the same time in everything. Archetypal, as we talked about last week. It's a testimony to their true nature and their true spiritual home. The first stone altar was neither a weapon in the struggle for survival nor a sheltering haven from storm or foe. The fact that that's true offers proof beyond a shadow of doubt that humans profess their allegiance to a cosmic order other outside than the natural evolution, the necessitated evolution. Kant's two sources of wonder, the starry heaven above and the moral order within, gave conscious expressions to what the first altar builder had intimated in a non-verbal way, through action, through the act committed, just like there are acts committed in nature, like we talked about last week. That of erecting an altar for the starry heaven is an image of the divine archetypal nature that is not under the sway of this necessitated natural evolution. It is virginal nature and is also operant in what occurs and happened in the whole of development of temporality. And the moral law inscribed in the human soul, Kant's categorical imperative, signifies the reality of the presence in the human being, reality of the presence in the human being, of what the Bible calls the image and likeness of God. That is the principal archetype of the human being. The miracle of humans raising themselves up over and against natural evolution, and this is what is especially wonderful about idealism, is that they do not merely postulate a world order and a morality other than those of the serpent. Rather, and above this, they employ the very faculties whose development he owes to the serpent, reason and its attendant senses. This separateness, this separate, it's not, those aren't spiritual faculties. They are a limited, experimental, limited knowing space. It's the way that a limited human knowing space is made by those faculties. And so those are used in a direction counter to the purposes and ends of evolution itself. And this is reflected in the awakened ones. People like Buddha, that's a humanism. And so applied to the utilization of tools and the exercise of control over nature, reason with its capacity to calculate, to establish causality, why, what, how, when, to achieve the greatest yield with least effort, greatest yield with the least effort. This is also a principle of technology, isn't it? Technical enframing. We can see in this, fundamentally, it's a big part of human being. We are worker, noble, and priest at the same time. Everyone is. The noble is in between. The worker is, of course, just the civilization builder, but civilization, philosophy, and religion are that worker, noble, priest. The noble is poetry. It's a mix of both. The blood of man and the blood of angels, the blood of the divine, intermixed. Poetry. And so this reason, we say, has been raised by human beings to the level of pure contemplation. Humanity's true nature wrenched this. Human's true nature wrenched this reason, calculating, causality, understanding, purpose to achieve greatest yield, least effort, reason away from that push of necessity. Like a kind of booty, insofar as it was capable of being directed to pure contemplation. And so what is that which is alone human? Contemplation as the birth of nobility. Contemplation is the condition of the mind concentrated upon transcendental concepts, ideas, and ideals, and not upon utility and advantage in the field of materialistic realism. Thereby it sets itself in harmony with the human being's divine archetypal nature and becomes a creative fountainhead of things that, as regards natural evolution, are not only unnecessary or of no utility, but extremely troublesome to the calculative mode. So it's more than just not being of utility. It's actually impedes, in a way, impedes this utilitarian Vielzermacht. We have to thank contemplation for the origin of such philosophies as Sankhya, Vedanta, Buddhism, Pythagoreanism, Platonism, Stoicism, and Kantianism. All these idealistic philosophies are strangers to the world, understanding here the world as that of natural evolution or necessitated. I think natura naturata rather than free development, free virginal nature. So humanity does not owe any inventions or new tools to this or these philosophies. At best, perhaps a few musical instruments, but music doesn't signify technological progress. There's nothing in Musk's rockets and the technological age that is. They're just high. It is of the spirit. It's an extension of lower instincts, really. Or it's something that co-opts and steals and mimics from providence. Providence should be used for what the Lord directs, with true, deep, mystical contact with him, not co-opt what it may know and grant, as the serpent always has, as a mimic, as we'll find out later, for its own ends, which so much of everything is. So things that are inspired and revelation inside, yeah, it has been largely co-opted by this civilizational snake that the Antichrist AI that's growing speaks to and represents. Now, we've referred to idealistic philosophies here and not to religions because they're not only purely human, but also they have applied the faculty of reason stemming from natural evolution to raise it up to the level of contemplation. Idealism is humanistic, then, inspired by the image and likeness to wrench the faculty of reason, which the serpent developed, to contemplation out of the stream. And so, in contrast, religions cannot be regarded as purely human expression or creations. Their provenance transcends the purely human. They spring from the fount of divine superhuman revelation. For this reason, it is in idealism, which is not divine revelation, that the purely human manifests itself. The in-between. Something that, a word that Heidegger used that I found very helpful in disclosing, or at least intimating, the space that we are and work from to ennoble the empirical self and heal it with the help of the transcendent self. We don't abandon it, we ennoble it, as we've said many times before. And so this speaks to the distinction between an awakened one, a righteous man, versus a saint or a revelatory one, a prophet. Here it is that humans express their innermost being. Idealism is the voice of one crying in the wilderness. The one who postulates faith that has neither that's neither in the stream of the things of the world and lusting after things and filled with the lust of those things and provoked by it, nor is he yet inspired by, outside by the divine. This idealism is this in-between space of concepts that the Greeks often talked about. In between. It's the 0 point we all have to actually get to when we begin to leave the world. And idealism actually helps with. And that's what philosophy's use is, actually, as a preparation for initiation and what we talk about. It's to get you to the 0 point, away from the world, yet not yet inspired by the divine. So, and what is that other than nothing more than becoming one poor in spirit for the kingdom of heaven, for it to be possible to ingress. That's true humanity, this one crying in the wilderness at the 0 point. Postulating what it cannot live without. which is Kantianism as well. It postulates like one crying in the wilderness. It's this place that lies between the domains of natural evolution and divine revelation. Only in this place can the human voice and the human voice alone be heard. Not the voice of those mastered and bullied by the provokings of the destined, of the past, of the necessitated nature, natural evolution, the children of this world, nor that of illumined and inspired prophets and seers, but the voice of those crying out from the loneliness of their own true being, or their own empirical, the middle space of that being. Before, because it's our true home is outside. But as we know, it's hard to actually cut these things up. What we are doing right now is a cutting up. And these things have a degree to which they are in flow, which we'll get to. We tend to think in states, end states, this and that, rather than in temporally where it's a flow to become. But our true home, our true self transcends. It's outside time. But in terms of the true human part, well, it's in this loneliness, isn't it? Isolated from both. And so for the true human being, the true being of humanity is not revealed in a technological progress that is really only an extension of natural evolution, but in an idealism that represents the capacity for contemplation with no practical end in view. Contrary to will Zermacht, with idealism, humanity, in the true sense of the word, begins to be human. The morality of those who adhere to this latter, empirically, materialistic realists, is rooted in the principle of utility and expediency, no matter whether an individual or on an individual or a collective basis. Either one's the same, as we discovered last week when we talked about communism is just Wilsemacht on a collective scale, progressivism. Doesn't matter that it cooperates. And so in contrast, idealists, the human beings capable of contemplation, have a morality rooted not in shrewd intelligence, but in knowledge of the nobility of true human nature, which is inspired from the image and likeness in the microcosm. And their fundamental rule is that of self-mastery, that is, control by the higher human being of the natural human being, or the necessitated human in whom he or she dwells. What is at issue here is the mastery of the contemplative mind over the human being's impulsive and passionate drives. Thus, and as we know in Christian mysticism, that actually leads to a divine instinct. So we become spontaneously obedient to a different instinct outside. But this is merely talking about mastering the contemplative as divided from action. Well, what we talk about isn't this. What we talk about is a synthesis of action and contemplation. So once you're connected to the divine, you actually make contact with revelatory action. So the impulses of the necessitated nature are restrained, and you expand on the vertical, and you make contact with divine instinct or revelatory grace. So don't get the wrong impression that we're talking about here with Christianity is this just a contemplatives, because people usually think that's what asceticism is. It's not. Christian asceticism is the synthesis of action and contemplation, like I just said. But before that, in the humanisms, they don't have access to divine will, do they? It's really about, it's human on its own. And so anyway, let's go on. The mastery of the passionate drives, and thus it was so that Plato regarded intellectual discernment, wisdom, right and wrong. And wisdom could be, you could consider imminent logos, which means close or immediate, coming soon or close by, which he called, or inside, once brought inside, which he called wisdom, discernment, which he called wisdom, which you could think about the head, thought, as the root and source of all virtues. The others, namely courage, which you could consider the heart, feeling, and prudence, which you could consider the legs and will, and justice, which you could consider harmony, righteousness, and the sort of synthesis of the head, legs, and thought, feeling, thought, and will. In harmony, body, soul, and spirit in harmony. Or at least body and soul for them. And the result from the penetration of the whole human being by the ever-intensifying light of wisdom. Plato conceived of justice as the ultimate fruit of the process of this penetration by the light of wisdom, this being none other than self-mastery. Thus, justice represents the crown of humanity's moral development, humanity's on its own. What might be called wisdom become flesh. Idealism down to the limbs and the will, a harmony, like I said before. The Indian sage Sankaracharya also describes 4 fundamental virtues in connection with the way of realization. The first, which constitutes the root principle of the others, is discernment between the essential and the non-essential, which is really about, they consider it illusion, remember. From this follows equanimity, harmony or righteousness. Equanimity makes possible the development of so-called 6 jewels, that is, the moral habits that together enable and guarantee prudent conduct in every circumstance. The fourth and last virtue or quality is the aspiration to liberation from the shackles of nature, or incarnation, really. Necessity. Nature is the process of natural evolution, but they consider the whole thing an illusion, remember. Though still missing here, and of course missing here is that they deny the first love, which is the big error of the East. Which is why it's Luciferic. It's about liberation from everything, not simply contemplation on its own, but liberation from it. Well, yeah, I guess you could consider it contemplation on its own. It's abandoning personality, as we've talked about before. It's depersonalization and abandoning the mission and the first love, to love all. Remember, it's not an illusion. It's only illusory in the sense that the truth of facticity and actuality is actually it's an illusion to us in modernity. It's an illusion, but its truth is revealed through the light of the Logos. So once you have God with you, then it's true. But the Easterner considers it just completely an illusion. They're a monism. One substance and so we know it's a legitimate twofoldness. Man is legitimate. And so, where were we? And so in this, of course, is missing the future, as we've talked about before. This is talking almost pre-Christ, right? We have with contemplation only the justice according to the past, or necessity, or balancing a thirst of one crying in the wilderness. It's missing the future and mercy, even though it can achieve a harmony with the world. And you know that in the difference between the East and Greek is that Plato's is about harmonizing. The Greeks were very concerned with harmonizing with the world, how to harmonize the soul with the world, whereas the Eastern is trying to escape it. And so to that equation, you add the future, don't you? But we're not talking about that now. We're talking about pure humanism. But of course, you add the future, and he tells you what needs to be. It's not based on what has been and the destiny of nature and the destiny of the past. Pushing into the future, it's providential. And so he doesn't... well, I've talked about that in lectures before, so I won't go into it now. But mercy is meaning as someone else tells you and shows you what will be, and knows what will be, and knows how to change it into what should be. And so for the Easterner, as for Plato, it's a matter of establishing the sovereignty of the contemplative mind over all other aspects of human nature. Just as Plato regarded the wisdom as the basis of moral growth, the Easterner, I'm not going to try to pronounce his name again, pointed to the discernment between the essential and the non-essential, a faculty very similar, of course, to Plato's wisdom. The Easterner's equanimity responds to the courage of Plato, and the six jewels are none other than Plato's prudence. The sole divergence appears in the final crowning and integrating virtue that for Plato is justice, which you could consider balance with the world. And for the Easterner is the aspiration for freedom or liberation completely from it. It's the serpent fleeing upward, is a good symbol for it. And so the morality of Buddhism, presented in the Noble Eightfold Path, and these things have their nobility, which is oriented towards right meditation or contemplation, is likewise essentially a development that leads to a full development of the contemplative mind. The same can be said of the Stoics. Their morality is that of the sovereignty of the contemplative mind, a human self-mastery through reason. Such is the human kingdom situated between the kingdoms of nature and God. Sovereignty of the contemplative mind, along with the morality that gives rise to, along with the morality this gives rise to. This sovereignty of the contemplative mind represents the pure humanism that stands between nature and God. What is man? Child of the serpent, or is he a child of light? In what sense is he enfoldment? In what sense is he radiation? Or can he be radiation? Or revelation, or contacted with revelation? And so the most general characteristic feature of this world is enfoldment, while the most general characteristic feature of the created world, the world of the serpent, is enfoldment. The general characteristic of the created world is blossoming and radiation. This is the second world we talked about last week. The serpentine world is a parasite in virginal nature of the 7 days of creation. Archetypal versus grinding natural selection. Or the war of all against all versus cooperation. Another way of thinking about those two things is blossoming and radiation. Think about the tree. Blossoming from its archetype. Differentiation versus natural selection. And so thus the brain and intestines in the animal kingdom are due to enfoldment. Foliage, branches, and flowers are expressions of the contrary tendency in the plant kingdom. For example, foliage is the lung of the plant, unfolded and open to the air, whilst the animal and human lung is enfolded foliage. Or another example, the sun is a state of radiation, whilst the planets are in a state of condensation, enfoldment. These two tendencies have their traditional designations. They are light and darkness, i.e., radiation and enfoldment, respectively. This is why the Gospel, according to John, in describing the cosmic drama, says, "Light shineth in the darkness, and the darkness apprehendeth it not." This expresses that light was not caught up in the whirlwind of enfoldment and is not obscured by it, but shines in the darkness. This is the quintessence of the gospel, the good news. Thus the sun and the stars are to the planets, including the earth, as light is to darkness. The world of the serpent is that of enfoldment. The serpent biting his tail and thus forming a closed circle is its symbol. Completely successful enfoldment would be hell, or the state of complete isolation, which has been his objective from the beginning. The Uberman is his objective. But complete enfoldment and accomplished Isolation has in no way succeeded in the world. The history of so-called natural evolution or necessitated evolution traces us a tableau of successive attempts, none of which have been successful, aiming at establishing through complete unfoldment a viable organism with an absolutely autonomous consciousness, self-referential. Power is truth. Self-assertion with its autonomous, which is autonomous and independent. But atoms associate themselves. Oh wait, hang on a minute. Sorry about that. It's aiming at establishing complete unfoldment, a viable organism with an absolutely autonomous consciousness without falling prey to madness. Is not the atom an entity produced by unfoldment, which is autonomous and independent? But atoms associate themselves with one another in molecules. Is the molecule, therefore, not an autonomous entity? Well, molecules associate themselves into mysterious fraternities of life that we call organic cells. Then there are the innumerable associations of molecules in the organism. The history of evolution of living organisms is that of the triumph of the principle of association and a cooperation over that of disassociation and isolation. The latter has succeeded in forming only non-viable monsters like the dinosaurs, also the insects. Where are they now? They were only a great biological impasse, therefore they perished. Their reign gave way to that of mammals and birds. The former also produced many forms of impasse beyond an upsurge. Before an upsurge of vertebrates came, during the advance of which form after form was rejected, condemned either to a rapid or slow extinction until the primates, from which one subdivision, that of Homo sapiens, took possession of the earth, and now rules without rival. Thus our planet, which was in the Mesozoic era the planet of reptiles, has now become the planet of the human being. Is the human being the granddaughter of a reptile, then? Or, in biblical terms, are human beings the children of the serpent, the children of darkness, the product of unfoldment, or are they children of the light? Man has the most developed brain. Now, the brain is, as Henry Bergson has shown, an organ which plays the role of a sieve with respect to consciousness. It is an instrument of knowledge and ignorance at the same time. Its function is to admit on behalf of consciousness what is appropriate to it, and not to admit, to forget what is not appropriate to it from the point of view of action or the will aspiring to action. So this part of human being is a relevance realization for utility. The brain is therefore an organ of selection, the epitome of the process of evolution. For what the brain does is essentially what took place during the millions of years of biological evolution. The whole of evolution is the process of the sequence, creation, selection, rejection, forget, repeated incessantly. The proper forms are chosen, the others are rejected. There is an invisible sieve at work. Now this sieve has become visible. It has become flesh. It is the brain. Henry Bergson says, concerning the brain, in the work of thought in general, as in the particular case of memory, the brain appears to be charged simply with the task of impressing on the body the movements and attitudes which act what the mind thinks, or what the circumstances invite it to think. I have expressed this by saying that the brain is an organ of pantomime. Indeed, the cerebral phenomena are to the mental life just what the gestures of the conductor are for the symphony. They mark out the motor articulations. They do nothing else. In other words, we should find nothing of the higher workings of the mind within the cerebral cortex. Except its sensory functions, the brain has no other part than to mime, in the full meaning of the term, the mental life. The brain and cunning, intellect and the magic agent. The brain is therefore an organ affecting mimicry, choosing what is what it is going to mime. It mimes accordingly. Now, relevant mimicry is precisely what the book of Genesis understands by cunning, when it says that the serpent has more cunning than any other creature that the Lord God had made. Cunning is, as it were, the psychological principle of the serpent, just as enfoldment and movement in a closed circle are its dynamic principle. To be cunning is to mime wisdom after having eliminated the essential, its light. And then to make use of it for one's own ends, like we were talking about earlier. It's actually eliminating our contact with essence, eliminating the essential, its light, eliminating the true light. It's a reflection. And to make use of it for its own Vilsamacht ends. This is why it is said that the devil is the ape of God, that he apes God. The brain is therefore, he's a limited version of it. The brain is therefore due to the serpent. It is the work of the serpent and mankind. And as we know, man is far more than just the physical organism that we see before us. There's a whole, your depth being isn't in your brain. You are a spiritual being, and you discover that through initiation, seeing the deeper layers. You're not going into your brain. You're going into the depths of the world and the subject. Of course, it's hard to get into that mindset. You discover it through the depth practices. But in modernity, we're in the mode of being where we think it's all in my brain. Anyway, even McKilchrist, and I'm not sure how well this aligns with McKilchrist's results, but I think that the way he interprets it can all be reinterpreted in a more appropriate way than he does with his right brain, left brain. Because I can see that very easily being used as a ruse of technical of inframing experiences of the depths. But what you know from this side of with the epistemic principle, what you know and you've seen, and it's just obviously evident, is the object is operating in what is objective of you. Things are predicted and occur. It's clearly outside of that, and it's not some special instinct of right brain mode, some world. No. It extends, of course, far beyond, infinitely. And the evidence you can just have presented for yourself if you do the initiative practices of Christian mysticism, as I talk about. And our epistemic principle isn't a scientific one. It's a synthesis of the truth criterion of idealism and realism, actually, the Christian Hermetic epistemic principle. But it relies on evidence from the depths, which science doesn't have access to. They only have access to the surface sense. Everything is filtered through surface sense and generalized induction from the generalized experience. The depth experience isn't generalized to everyone unless they go through the process. So it's a large group of people, but it's not everyone, is it? So it can't be falsified in the same way or confirmed in the same way, which is why you can't really make a science of it like Rudolf Steiner tried to. But his work is definitely useful in showing how coherent. And in fact, like I've said many times before, the process of this offers higher certainty than any science ever could. That's always eyewitness, always indirect. Ultimate certainty comes from direct contact with truth. It was he. You just have to get out of this mode, of this serpentine mode, this mimicry mode, this illusory mode that has the world presencing to you as it does, unfortunately. And so the serpent is indeed the great magical agent. That is to say, the principle which mimes essential consciousness, which is therefore the link between the subject and the object. He's operant in how the world presents to us. It's beyond just your mind. You reach out and touch the object, and it's the intermediary between you and it is greatly informed by this magical agent, this serpentine magical agent of fire or celestial electricity, this devil. Just as the brain is the link between consciousness and action. So there's just as you have a link between consciousness and action, there is but it's not outside. It's, you could say, in the psychological unconscious, which extends beyond you. It's everywhere. Or the astral, you could call it. So it's created. He is created. He's not, it doesn't emanate. Because there's also the new miraculous agent. These are sort of scientific-like words, I suppose, or Platonic-like words. The new magical agent, or the participatory miraculous agent. Who is that? It's the Holy Spirit, who is is high fire, which is love. His fire, this magical agent, is electrical, polemical, dry. High fire and the Holy Spirit, which the Lord Jesus makes possible once he's incarnated, direct intervention. But we'll see the difference between that and there's another agent too, which comes from this virginal nature we're often talking about. But let's go on. Yes, the first representatives of cerebral intellectuality, the sons of the serpent of ancient legends, were certainly the first masters of newborn civilization. It is certainly they that taught the rudiments of the arts and the sciences to childlike humanity. You see this in the Promethean myths. Is the serpent, as the great magical agent, the only magical agent? Is he the magical agent of all magic? Again, I don't like using the word sacred magic. It's participatory miraculous. But does divine miraculous or sacred magic make use of the same agency as the fakirs, hypnotists, magnetic healers, and necromancers? Of course not. It's love. Centuries of experience show that there's not only another agent and another magic, but also that there is another consciousness and experience than that due to the brain. It was not the serpent that John the Baptist saw descend upon the Lord of the miraculous, the greatest miracle worker in history, because he's God. It was the dove that descended. John bore witness, saw the Spirit descend as a dove from heaven, and it remained on him. John. Several days later, the miracle of the wedding at Cana was accomplished. The 7 miracles, the wedding at Cana, the healing of the nobleman's son, the healing of the sick man at the pool of Bethesda, the feeding of the 5,000, the walking on water, the healing of the man born blind, and the raising of Lazarus. They did not, of course, have the serpent as their agent, nor was the brain the instrument of their accomplishment, nor was cerebral intellectuality their source of initiative. Where's the initiative come from? What's the instrument? Where's that? The agent here is the dove, the spirit which is above the brain, above the head, and which descends upon the head and remains there. That's what this purification, illumination, and union are about. The spirit which transcends cerebral intellectuality. This spirit is the source of initiative, the true and only free decision we actually have. We only really make a decision. There's only really a decision when it comes from outside. Luckily, we're nested in him out there. At the ground of our psyche, we're nested in the Lord, in the eternal. And that's where the only freedom is. Anything inside is a push from necessity, whether it's the past or the will or whatever it might be, a provoking of the world. Even if it's mixed up, it's only to the degree to which we are in contact with Even unconsciously, you will have some free decisions, but to the degree to which you are in contact with this is the degree to which you are truly free. Obedience is freedom from the slavery of the world. The world, as we've talked about many times, presents itself as freedom. There's decisions between all the foods, casual sex, pornography, whatever it might be, are really slaveries, but they're presented by the serpent as freedoms. And so this spirit is the source of initiative, true initiative itself, outside initiative, and simultaneously it is the agent and instrument of divine, miraculous, the sacred miraculous, or sacred magic, you could call it. But that, be that as it may, there is a rather pronounced tendency in esoteric literature to present the serpent as the principle of realization, even as the sole principle of knowledge, including esoteric knowledge. We are able in the first place to see in the serpent only the principle of cerebration, cerebral intellectuality, and the principle of enfoldment that we've been talking about, the tendency to form closed circles, inescapable. It's the principle of the fall. And the reason why they always turned to this, whether it's Blavatsky or others, a lot of it is to do with he who comes in his own name you will receive. If I come in my name, you won't receive me. Was it not grand enough for you to accept the Lord? Was it not grand enough for you? Did you have to be the great sage? Did you have to be the great warrior rather than accept the true God? Was washing feet, a career of washing feet, too low for you? Of serving others and helping others and loving, was that too low for you? That's why. There is a tendency in that, it has been for, and we must be ever watchful of this, is that we're just sons, man, just sons. But there's a tendency in that type of literature, not all of it, of course. Well, people want to be special, don't they? I'm special. Everyone is special. Everyone can be. But some want to be singled out especially. But you're just a son. But everyone can be given a providential purpose. The key purpose is theosis. But if you give the time, he'll put you to good use. Helping. And there's nothing greater than that. But everyone can do it. There's great meaning for everyone if you're willing to put the time in. And so, in the first place, thanks to the work of salvation, which has a millennial-old history, a gradual spiritualization of the work of the serpent, including cerebral intellectuality, has taken place. And because intervention from above not only frustrates the formation of completely closed circles, but also it's a spiral. It also gives the tendency of unfoldment a direction towards solidarity. Always. And so there's another agent at work as well. Not just the new magical agent, or the miraculous Jesus and the dove, not just the dove, but there's a growth agent too that's always been there before the incarnation, which we'll learn more about shortly. And so solidarity you see too in the process through stages such as the family, the nation, and the community of civilization. Yes, yes. Come on, friend. Get me. I might have to use this one. There we go. Bang. What truly guides evolution? What are we then to be? For the reality and entirety of evolution consists in one. On the one hand, the enfolding activity of the serpent, which has formed the brain and produced cerebral intellectuality, and two, on the other hand, the light from above, which opens the enfolded and illumines cerebral intellectuality and co-opts it for its own ends. Opens and illumes closed places. The serpent and the dove, these are, in the last analysis, the factors underlying the whole process of evolution. One has to choose and take the side of either the serpent or the dove. My reply would be, if one has to choose between the side of either the serpent or the dove, the reply is, in the framework of the Lord's counsel, be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Know the serpent's wisdom at a distance. Don't will it. Don't identify with the serpent like Nietzsche did. But live and will and know the dove. Live and will. That one should try to unite cerebral intellectuality and spiritual spontaneity. This is what I was talking about before. We gain access to revelatory action from the future, directing us what to do. Grace. It is certainly necessary to think in articulated thoughts, though, isn't it? In a discursive manner, which this is about. This, what we're doing right now is part of this. But above this process of discursive thought, there is always soars he who is the ideal. An ideal, the way we talk about it, is a being. A being, a futural being. It is in the light of the ideal that one should, which is the eternal, right? It's a real, the only true real there is, actually. The true real. And it's through the light of this dove, this ideal that one should think. We've said that human beings, as the animal species endowed with the most developed brain, are children of the serpent. It is necessary to add that as beings aspiring and becoming to the ideal, to the being of the good, of the way, platonically aspiring to the ideal of the good, the beautiful, and the true, or aspiring to become the way, the truth, and the life, to become towards those things, human beings are children of the light. Because whatever may be said in the contrary sense, there is no reason, nor is there anything given in the whole domain of biological evolution culminating in the formation of the human brain, which explains and makes the human aspiration towards truth, beauty, and goodness appear necessary, or towards way, ultimately way, truth, and life, who is a being. Every monastery and convent is, moreover, a direct contradiction to the thesis that mankind is only the product of biological evolution. All renunciation of concrete things such as wealth, power, health, and even life. Remember, the Lord's the master of death, the king of death, for an ideal and life. For an ideal bears witness to the trans-evolutionary, trans-cerebral reality of the nucleus of the human being. You don't die for some idea. You only ever die for a being, which is what an ideal really is. You only ever die for a true living relationship with a God. Look at all the disciples and the way they died. Utterly horrific. Because they had Christ with them. True divine being. If the excavations carried out by paleontologists supply skulls and skeletons as evidence of biological evolution leading to the human brain, the martyrs throughout history bear witness at the same time to the fact of the transcendence of the nucleus of human nature, its virginal archetype, transcendent self, with respect to biological evolution. Also, another thing that points towards this as well is there's these skulls on Mount Athos that for the particular monks that achieve a certain level of union, perhaps you could say, split down the front of the skull. Interesting. Take of that what you will. Look it up on YouTube. This is because complete evolution is the intersection of biological evolution and spiritual evolution. This is what we've been talking about, the omega point, the true guider is of salvation and redemption. It's we fell down and we're going back. Christ is waiting now at the end of time for us to reach him. That's it. And that's what we're supposed to do when we're here. And so the fact of the intersection of these two quite different domains is the reality of the fall. The factical happening of the intersection of these different domains is the happening of the fall of temporality, where past meets true future, and where the mediators between that natural, that destiny, and providence as will, destiny, heredity, will, providence, which is us, will, collective unconscious, and then providence, future. The other term of the cosmic drama with which we are occupied and which is linked to that of the fall is redemption, like we were saying, down and up. We have said above that redemption is the cosmic act of the reintegration of the fallen world in first creating and opening in the closed circle, religion, initiation, prophecy, then in instituting a path of exit and an entrance through this door, and lastly in transforming the fallen world from within by the radiation of the incarnated Word, Jesus Christ. We said that last week. And we go into detail why that happens first, the religion, because it's all pre-done. But anyway, thus the thesis that we are advancing here is the work of salvation leading to actual redemption is universal concerning both space and time. For it's acted since, we have to say, the cradle of mankind's history, and extends to all groups and all religions. This is not perennialism, though. It's not what I'm talking about. It's simply that everything was made by the Logos. And Christ was prepared for. It just happens to be those other religions are muddied waters, but he was. All the other religions are and peoples were to some degree guided and to accept Christ once he had incarnated, whereas one people had to be pulled away and from all the muddied water of other cultures and civilizations for a new ingression, completely clean from outside, through a purification into the desert. They had to be purified of the other mistakes of Luciferic and satanic nature of all the other religions. But doesn't mean that there wasn't. Of course, there is preparation to receive and accept him. There were other missions, but the key mission, of course, was the preparation for the incarnation, the body of Christ to be incarnated. And so, where were we? And so the centuries are its stages, and the whole of mankind is its field. Of course, Christ is the master of all of it. Christ was prepared for everywhere. The world was prepared to accept the Logos. One people was set aside to have it incarnated. We see this in the mythos across the world, as Rudolf Steiner well articulates, explaining why and showing how it's a culmination. A culmination, and that there are preparations to accept. There are truths within the muddied water, revealings. So the work of salvation is Catholic in the literal, Hermetic, magical, Gnostic, and mystical sense of the word. Hermetic philosophical, that means. And so this means to say that the history of the suffering, militant, and triumphant church is as long as that of humanity, and that it is as vast as humanity itself. For the word is the true light that enlightens every man coming into the world. Every man. Every human being, always and everywhere. There is therefore only a single work of salvation. There is no perennialism, which includes all human endeavor truly aiming at transcending the brain and cerebral intellectuality, and which includes all true revelations from above throughout all ages of the history of mankind. This is not perennialism, of course. Any pre-Christian religion that had some truths with it for the purposes to prepare this people to later receive the Logos in muddied water is totally inappropriate to continue with Christ now incarnated, and doesn't work. Or it does have a certain, like we've talked about before, it's ecstasy only, let's say. But he's completely changed everything. And so any practice of this nature or religion of this nature leads to Luciferic or satanic ends. Will to power, depersonalization, or the winged serpent fleeing upward, abandoning the first love. Abandoning man's mission here. We have to be morally purified. And so what would be, and look at my other lectures to go into detail about this. And so what would be appropriate is to integrate the ethnic elements as the Orthodox Church does, as we saw also the Church do in England and in Greece when Christ first arrived there. Well, did those feet in ancient times? Of course, he was always there. That's the whole point. Walk upon England's mountains green. Yes, he's the light before men enter facticity. And it's, of course, as Paul says, I believe, to the Greeks, is that, this unknown God here, it's talking about Christ. But there is an Indian Orthodox Church, for instance, that would integrate the ethnic elements of the Easterner. That's the best way to do it, not to, I think, to complete a muddied sort of ecumenism that, which is one unfortunate thing about, I think, Catholicism. And so, we go to next. Stages of salvation, stages of redemption. It operates in stages, and from the first altar erected somewhere on a hill in the corner of a field to the great cathedrals of Europe aspiring to the heights of consciousness above the sphere of cerebral intellectuality. It has been in stages. The stages of the work of universal salvation constitute the spiritual history of mankind, which is the great universal Bible, of which the historical Bible is a part. It can be summarized in two ways, according to two different views. From the point of view of revelation and that of operation, the revelation knowings, POV. According to the first point of view, mankind's spiritual history can be summarized by giving the various aspects of God that are revealed successively in the spiritual history of mankind. The 10 names of God represent a summary of mankind's spiritual history from the point of view of the gradual revelation of God. And I have a lecture that goes into these names, I think, when I talk about the 10 commandments. The name of God, and for the aspect represented, from the aspect represented by the name Adonai, in Hebrew Lord, to the aspect indicated by the name Ehyeh, I am. There is a long road, the former name being a term for the superiority of power, pure and simple, whilst the latter name signifies intuition of the being who is the essence of being, he who is. Operant, which is miracle, action, point of view. According to this point of view is the operation of the work of salvation. One could summarize mankind's spiritual history by describing its stages from the first opening of the closed circle of the serpent to the advent and blossoming of the reign of God within the circle. The advent, of course, being Christ. And so the knowing of the true God culminates in his reign on earth. The revelation of God and who he is intersects with his reign in facticity, advent and blossoming, operant and revelation, action and knowing, will and thought. It's just a way of thinking about what those two points of view. And of course, what is the operant? The operant is Christ, because he is the miracle worker and behind all miracles, authentic ones from outside. And so the stages in question are: one, the first stage, that is the opening of the closed circle, makes way for the entrance of faith into incarnated humanity, which corresponds to purification, where you gain faith. Two, the path of exit and entrance through this door. The second stage brings it hope, illumination, which is a knowing of what will be. Three, the incarnation of the Word. The third stage kindles love within, which is the active presence of divine life at the heart of the circle of the serpent, at the heart of the microcosm too, of this enclosed intellect, rigidity that must melt. We are the microcosm of this. That's union. So the true union with God only comes with Christ. That's when the beatific vision becomes possible. Other things that went on were always there was no legitimate twofoldness in them. That's why they believe that, again, facticity is an illusion, and there's only it's a monism. But we know the ground of reality is love, but because of Christ, true union becomes possible, in which we are also. What happened to them is they were dissolved by being. They thought they were dissolving being, but their consciousness just dissolves, which is why they thought that. And for us, it's a beatific vision, both in the same time. In the domain of essence. All that mankind has been believing, have been hoping, has become reality in the present. Thank God. This is the essence of the whole spiritual history of mankind in one single phrase. Everything, friends, everything was about Christ. And if you can read the work, if I don't know, pagans don't watch this, they wouldn't listen to me anyway, but if you can read Easterners, whoever it is, read Steiner, read Valentin Tomberg, and you'll see it all is about the preparation for Christ. They didn't believe that at first. Steiner, they were objective, and then they looked into it. It's like, do you think you're smarter than Steiner? Yeah. Give it look at his work. It's utterly incredible, especially from a religious studies aspect. The omega point is Jesus Christ. The final cause is Jesus Christ. And that's what we're articulating here. And we'll go further on to explain also the agent of growth. And so, the spiritual participation in the whole world, the spiritual preparation in the whole world, and B, the real preparation in the chosen people, Israel of the incarnation. So there's a spiritual preparation going on in all the other stuff. He does and did reveal things there, but it was marred and muddied. And so it's A and B. A is the spiritual preparation of everything else to receive the Logos, and B, the real participation of the chosen people of Israel, of the incarnation, which the manifestations of revelatory ones, which are equivalent to saints and prophets or avatars, entrance, and awakened ones, bodhisattvas or righteous men, exit, which is, again, humanism and contemplation, getting to the 0 point on the path to Buddhahood. They're mere imperfect reflections of him. And you could consider that the incarnation is a synthesis of entrance and exit. He's the Lord of death, not only life, which others might be considered. He's the Lord of true union, not only of liberating the good, which the Easterners would talk about. The avatar liberates the good. No, he transforms the good. It's not just a historical thing then. It's not muddied and marred by the old law. He is the new law. He's God. You know. But no one else claimed to be the Lord of death. He came to die to show the way. There's only one incarnation. He's the middle of time. But yeah, you have to have the argument for pagans or whatever, if they are watching, and they won't be. You have to have the argument fully laid out. There's not time for that. We're talking about the kingdom of man today. But if you want to fully expand it, really, you just have to do the practices and it will be shown to you the truth. You don't even need to read the argument. If you just say, I'm going to be open to this and do what Scott says, it'll prove to you with more certainty than any rational argument can give you. And you got to think, like, the thing that you believe as a proposition now is not giving you what you want. It's not giving you the radiating authority that just grounds you in something in certainty, where you're not radiating energy and love. You're not you know deep down there's a insufficiency at the ground of your being, and you're searching and looking for something to fill that gap. And what you're at is not satisfying that. It might distract you for a while or give you sort of a hegemonic will to power. It can provoke you, but it won't satisfy you, ultimately. It might possess you and burn you out like it did Nietzsche. Anyway. And of course, I'll do another lecture and I'll do a lecture coming up soon where I explain, using the Eastern sources, what an avatar is according to what they say, and show why both Buddha and Christ, and Buddha's not because he's a humanist. It's about exit, not entry. But absolutely clearly why Christ is not. And I've mentioned a few of the reasons there, being the Lord of Death, but why Christ is God, not an avatar, as the Easterners might try to integrate him like that, like the syncretists would do. They have done that. They have done that for Buddha too. And that's nothing more than what the Romans tried to do. But there's extreme differences that can be clearly laid out in a very convincing manner, and I'll do that in a full lecture, but I can't expand upon it here. And so then the incarnation itself, and lastly, all that is implied in St. Paul's words, great indeed, we confess, is the mystery of our religion. He is manifested in the flesh, vindicated in the spirit, seen by angels, preached among the nations, believed on in the world, and taken up in glory. Timothy. All right, next. Here we go. Destiny, will, providence. Now we're going to explore the agent of growth and the difference between fire and water, the agent of growth and the agent of magic. The serpent, the difference between the serpentine magic agent and the agent of growth, which comes from Eden, you could say, and has always guided the development alongside this other, the serpentine push. So there are three continuities in evolution. There is continuities, pushes. One, biological and hereditary continuity, which you could consider destiny or horizontal. Two, psychic continuity, the collective unconscious, will, the in-between of man. And three, the spiritual continuity or the work of salvation, which is future, providence, vertical. Note that these three lines of continuity correspond to the dynamic triangle which Fabre de Olivet reduced the history of the human race to. The triangle, destiny, will, providence. Heredity corresponds to destiny, fate, collective unconscious to will, and the work of salvation to providence. This is what he says concerning that triangle. But if man is at first only a power in germ, which civilization must develop, whence will come to him the indispensable principles of this culture? imply that it will be from the two powers to which he finds himself linked, and of which he must form the third. These two powers between which he finds himself placed are destiny and providence. Beneath him is destiny, natura naturata, necessitated nature. Above him is providence, natura naturans, free nature. He is himself, as kingdom of man, the mediatory will, the effective force placed between those two natures to serve them as a link, a means of communication, and to unite two actions, two movements, which would be incompatible without him. The three powers which I have just named constitute the universal ternary. Nothing escapes their action. All in the universe is subject to them, all except God himself, who, enveloping them in his unfathomable unity, forms with them the sacred tetrad of the ancients and the immense quaternary, which is all in all, and outside of which there is nothing. A tower is built, a tree grows. The two processes have this in common, that they present a gradual, and that's the end of that quote, of course. There's a tree and there's a tower. Two processes have this in common, that they present a gradual increase in volume with a pronounced tendency upwards. But there is at the same time the difference that the tower rises by leaps and bounds, whilst the tree shows a continuous elevation. This is because bricks and hewn stone are put one on top of the other in the process of building the tower, whilst the microscopic bricks, the cells of a tree, multiply through division and growth in volume. It is the sap of the tree rising from the roots into the trunk and branches which renders growth of the tree possible and makes it shoot up from the multiplication and growth in volume of its cells. Whilst the tower is dry, the tree is filled with sap in movement, which underlies both the division of its cells and their growth. In a word, it underlies the process of growth. Growth is flowing, whilst construction proceeds in leaps and bounds. And what is true of the artificial and the natural in the physical domain is also true in psychic and spiritual domain. The righteous flourish like the palm tree. They are ever full of sap and green. Psalm 92. But a downcast spirit dries up the bones. Proverbs. Here we are in the presence of a theme of the same significance as that of the astral magic agent we were talking about before. What does astral mean? Astral is the magic agent, means the magic agent is of the psychological unconscious. That's what the astral body is. Between facticity and the object and the subject, which is intellect, the throwing, which subject means, ject of subject word means throw, is the intellect, given form by this magic agent, which is the serpent. Again, remember, I've said this a lot. We've got to be, the intellect itself is something to be wary of, in the sense of, we have to make sense, of course, the intellect is to be subservient to the Holy Spirit and to God, and you have to awaken your access to him through the practices and make your intellect subservient to it. That's this whole process. You're kneeling your calculative mode and nature and intellectual nature, and you eventually make the full sacrifice of the intellect and all its values in this process. You still have it, although some people completely sacrifice it. It's possible to completely sacrifice it, and what that means is all the spiritual organs, let's call them, are instruments of God. And so you don't have attention anymore. You can't assign attention to normal problems of life. You'll know things of divine nature and follow the good, but you actually aren't capable of arbitrarily choosing. Again, you don't do this, but some saints, I think, have. But your attention is simply to divine things. You don't have the arbitrarily intellectual, because you're sacrificing all value for everything, really. But yeah, that's an extreme case. Also, fools for Christ are like that. It's the complete sacrifice of arbitrary movement of attention to be a divine instrument. But we don't do that. As you know from St. John of the Cross, he's a mystic, and it's very clearly the uniting of these two things, which is the whole point of this process. Spiritual impulsion and inspiration, and discursive thinking, and you see that in St. John of the Cross, a very coherent and rigorous phenomenology, and Steiner and Valentin Tomberg. And so that's all astral means. And so the link between consciousness and action, which so much is made of in esoteric literature, namely the theme of the universal sap of life, but also, being the psychological unconscious, it means also it's not emanated. It's not from outside. It's simply, it's created but unconscious, which means it's not, the serpent is not seen. You can only see his actions. He's in a sphere that's higher but still created, not eternal. That's where he operates from, which is what the psychological unconscious actually is. And of course, the miraculous agent is the fire of love, is a causeless cause completely outside, uncreated. And so just as there is a mysterious intermediary agent which affects the passage from imagination to reality, from image to facticity, so there also is a no less mysterious agent which affects the passage from the potential state of a seed to that of maturity, growth, the flow. For example, the passage from what is only potential to its realization. This is the agent of transformation from the ideal to the real, from the archetype, from the future, and from virginal nature, just as an intermediary force enters into play in the process which transforms imagination into action, for example, into an objective event, so does the play of an unknown force take place in the process of becoming, where either an acorn becomes a branched oak, or a crying infant becomes a St. Augustine, or lastly a world in the state of primordial mist becomes a planetary system which forms living beings, ensouled beings, and intellectual beings. Low fire versus high water. Thinkers of water or growth. Whatever it is in question, it does not matter whether it is the growth of an organism, the development of an individual, from birth to death, or cosmic evolution. It is necessary to postulate the existence of an active agent which affects the passage from the state of that which is only potential to one of reality, which is eclosion. You see this in the instance in an egg. An egg, of course, that's the potentiality is the gene, but beyond that, there's a final cause that makes life run, that does all this stuff. So, but something has acted during the time in which an acorn becomes an oak, or a fertilized egg becomes a mature man, or a primordial cosmic mist becomes a planetary system, including our globe inhabited by mankind. We know that this reasoning is not in accordance with the rules of the game fixed by scientism, but there are other rules above all those of natural reasoning, with which this here is not only in agreement, but which also is categorically demanded by them. Categorically, rather. This means to say that one must either resign oneself to silence of thought with regard to problems of this order, or else reason in a way that conforms to the nature, to the structural exigencies of the reasoning that is the rule of the game in these matters of the spirit. And what does that mean? It means, of course, we conform it to the Christian Hermetic epistemic principle being cohesive and non-contradictory with what's revealed from the depths, not only the surface senses of empirical science, because the things that actually run things, you can find and have it proved to you yourself by doing the practices as revelation. All this comes from mysticism, gnosis, the miraculous or magic, to a Hermetic philosophical. That from the depths upward. Science is generalized from the surface level. And so it's completely in alignment with revelation, using and co-opting the epistemic principles of idealism and realism. It's cohesive. It's without contradiction, with, though, these depth faculties that religious and the saints have always had. And so we take this far more seriously than we accept the results of science. They are relevant for this domain. There are other domains, other spheres, upward, emanation, creation, form. It is true. What they postulate is true of one domain, though, and ultimately is not what. It's not from the domain of what. It's the how in empirical surface life. And actually is of a it's kind of dilettante. They'd accuse probably us of dilettantism, but it's kind of dilettante in the sense that it doesn't dwell and look outside of just sensory experience when it is possible. Why? Probably a lot of the time because people don't want to. A lot of people are materialists because of a lack of morality, because they don't want to be accountable. They don't want deep down they don't want reality to be more moral, because they want to be able to do what they want. Anyway. And so it's necessary to postulate a structural agent of growth, just as it's necessary to postulate a magical agent acting as an intermediary between consciousness and events. If one decides to think about it, what is the intrinsic difference between the magical agent and the agent of growth? Well, the magical agent is an intermediary between consciousness and events, as we sort of talked a little bit about before. Imagination and action, image and facticity. Is the intellect sender, it's Lucifer, first light. Well, it's not actually the first light, but it's the first light we see once we're born, right? The magical agent is of an electrical nature, either terrestrial or celestial. It is a nature to act through discharges, through the emission of sparks and flashes. It is dry and warm, the nature of fire. Heraclitus comes to mind in this. War is the father of all. Since Christ, of course, like we said earlier, the high fire, the miraculous dove, is the new miraculous agent. We have access to anyway. And the agent of growth for angelic inspiration and the agent of growth have this in common, that they flow, that they do not act through shocks and discharges, but in a continuous way. Continuous transformation is the essential manifestation of the agent of growth, just as creative lightning is that of the magical agent. These two agents manifest themselves everywhere, including the domain of human intellectuality. Water, growth agent. Water's just a way of thinking about it. There are minds who have sided with water. Think about it symbolically. And it is to them that we owe the ideas of transformism, evolution, progress, education, natural therapy, living tradition. And there are others who have sided with Thales, believed, ancient philosopher, Greek philosopher, believed that it is the agent of growth or water which plays the principal role in the world. Fire, the magic agent, fire, to whom we owe the ideas of creationism, creation ex nihilo, invention, election, surgery, prosthesis, revolution, whilst Heraclitus attributed it to this magic agent or fire, the principal role in the world, that is. Goethe, in the classical Walpurgis Night, scene in part 2 of Faust, has Anaxagoras, a partisan of fire, discussed with Thales, a partisan of water, the theme of the priority of creative lightning or continuous transformation in nature. A discussion which leads to the dramatic result of Anaxagoras' magical evocation of the threefold moon, Diana, Luna, and Hecate, which he regrets. Thus, he throws himself down, face in the ground, imploring the flashing forces which threaten irreparable catastrophe to calm down. And you noted the difference between these things is stark in initiation. There's no salvation without temptation. As we talked about when we talked about the false Holy Spirit, you encounter the false Holy Spirit, and it's as it's described here, with the electricity and the fear. And Saint Teresa, the saints talk about this. So it's clear in the phenomenology, the difference. And we've talked about before the difference between the Lord and how he revelation is based on, and your experience is based on your moral developments. You know, it doesn't blow you away. It doesn't try to prove to you its truth through its power. Although, like I said before, the intensity slowly over time increases and increases and increases over time in terms of the depth and profoundness of the relationship you have with God and the Lord, directly, mystically, incredibly, and miraculously over time. Slow process. And becomes very clear why. Because it's the intelligence of intelligences that's guiding the process. And it becomes so clear to you that it's done with you in mind to help you in the right, careful, balanced manner. Because there have been saints who've realized that, something's going wrong here. I'm having lots of joyous experiences, but it seems to be interfering with my life. Perhaps this is deception. And so you begin to know when everything's getting better, of course. Part of the epistemic principle we talk about is that constructive fruitfulness. Is the holism, the bad tree doesn't bear good fruit. Again, with all the rest of it too, with the rest of the epistemic principle as well, but it suits more the agent of growth, slow growth. That being said, there are miracles. Well, it's all a miracle anyway. Remember, we are putting big dividing lines between things by describing this part of divine nature, describing this part of, these things are also blended together in terms of new magic agent and dove, Holy Spirit, When you're drawing distinctions, you are to a degree kind of platonically cutting things up. And this is all this stuff aligns with the other lectures we've been doing. So it does have respect, it's also to help with the phenomenology. This stuff becomes clear in unison with what you see in the process. So when we're always talking about this, it's with a phenomenology in mind, not necessarily a full-on theology. And so, it's not to be wondered at that Goethe, although he admits the reality of the magic agent or fire, ranges himself on the side of the agent of growth or water. For he was the author of the 4 works on metamorphosis, the principal theme of his life, namely on the metamorphosis of light or colour, on the metamorphosis of plants, on the metamorphosis of animals, and the metamorphosis of man, which Faust is about. And so important for our current age, friends, to read and understand Faust, because that archetype is a combination of many that came before, but it is the exact one we're facing right now. And you have to overcome to get away from the magic, this low magical agent which is trying to distract you, AI, also divination though, also a lot of these people in the Enlightenment who started and operated with this magic agent, doing ceremonial magic and that sort of thing. It works, but a lot of them recognized there's something in them that wanted more, that this power, but you have to abandon the advantages that you got using that divination and that thing for the true mystic experience of the one God who is Jesus Christ. And they all, some of the most famous of them turned to mysticism, turned to Christ. After realizing magic's real. And what's happening is people are seeing that with AI and they're going to start using it. You have to let go of that. People, a lot of Christians are using AI, and from the questions I've asked, at least, I haven't asked that much about it. I haven't contemplated heaps on it, but the intuitions that have been sent to me are not to use it at all. Not to use it just to, oh, it's okay, just to use that. It's not some normal technology, friends. It's something I'll probably do videos on more, then I'll have time to contemplate and try see if the depth faculties and things can be revealed to me on these matters. Well, how else do you say it? From the Lord, of why. But I've been guided, at least for how true you take it as you will, that you shouldn't use it at all. And so the agent of growth speaks to the fact that before virginal nature has always been active. Hang on, sorry. The agent of growth speaks to the fact that before virginal nature has always been active, or just virginal nature has always been active as an archetype guiding the process despite the interference of the serpent. This is the omega point, the final cause. His faith, Goethe's faith, that was that of transformism, evolution, the tradition of the culture of progress without revolution, in a word. Goethe believed in an attached peacemaker, in other words. Goethe believed in an attached value to all that flows, all that grows without leaps and bounds. He ranged himself on the side of the principle of continuity. And so intellect versus intuition, and more thinkers that are of this growth, more peacemakers. And continuity. The principle of continuity was portrayed in the intellectual domain in a particular impressive and fruitful way by the German philosopher Leibniz, proceeding in his thought according to the principle of continuity, for example, or for instance, thinking without leaps and bounds. Leibniz did not have to face the gulfs and abysses which separate one belief from another, or one thesis from another, or one human group from another. All theses are separated from their antitheses by abysses, but Leibniz threw the bridge of the rainbow of continuity, of gradual transition across them. Just as red is transformed gradually into orange, and orange into yellow, and which in its turn is transformed imperceivably into green, in order later to become blue, indigo, and violet, so is every thesis transformed into its antithesis. Thus, the thesis, each center of a particular existence, monad, is free, and the thesis, all is predetermined by the effective and final causes of the universe, pre-established harmony, coexist in peace in the rainbow of the totality of Leibniz's ideas on the world, although they are clearly contradictory. And there's nominalism and realism is what those two things are, the particular and the universal. For Leibniz, there were no more. But for Leibniz, they were no more or no less contradictory than red and violet in the rainbow. Platonism, Aristotelianism, Scholasticism, Cartesianism, Spinozism, Mysticism were for Leibniz only colours of the rainbow of perennial philosophy. Philosophia perennialis. And in his thoughts, he moved according to the zodiacal circle of thought. In fact, Steiner has an interesting thesis that shows how the zodiacal influences particular figures, like Nietzsche, for instance, and shows how each one applies to certain zodiacal. It's pretty convincing, but I won't go into it now. Anyway, his work was therefore that of peace, just as the work of Christian Hermeticism is. For Leibniz, method is nothing other than Christian Hermeticism, as many other people who aren't specifically Christian Hermeticists are actually operating in the same manner. Really, it's of the depths. It's the synthesis of thought and spirit. You know, when you talk about esotericism, all that really is what the saints are. They are the esoteric church. That's it, simply, because they're those who reached, or the mystics at least are, those who reached the most. It's the depth aspect of the church. And it was this rainbow of peace, the principle of continuity, which guided Leibniz in his all-consuming activity, which aimed at two salient goals: the foundation of scientific academies and the fusion of the Catholic and Reformed churches. He did a similar thing with differential calculus. Henry Bergson, who we've already talked about, had the courage and the talent to reaffirm with its scientific consequences the principle of continuity and the mode of thought which grasps movement by moving with it and not by arresting it, which the intellect tends to do by thinking in solid states, not seeing flow itself. And the following is what he says concerning this himself. If it's a question of movement, all the intelligence retains is a series of positions. First one point reached, then another, and then still another. But should something happen between these points, immediately the understanding intercalates both new positions, and so on indefinitely. It refuses to consider transition. Suppose we skip this intellectual representation of movement, which shows it as a series of positions. Skip that. Skip all the different states when you map them, as physics tends to do. Let us go directly to the movement itself and examine it without any interposed concept. We shall find it simple and all of a piece. Let us go further. Suppose we get it to coincide with one of those incontestably real and absolute movements which we ourselves produce. This time we have mobility in its essence, becoming. We feel that it mingles with an effort whose duration is an indivisible continuity. And that's connected with a kind of Bergsonian yoga, you could call it. But I only use the word yoga in terms of to summarize a concentration. It's not, he doesn't get it from the East or anything. But we shall say as much for change. The understanding breaks it up into successive and distinct states, supposed to be invariable. If one looks a little more closely at each of these states, noticing that it varies, asking how it could endure if it did not change, the understanding hastens to replace it by a series of shorter states, which in their turn break up if necessary, and so forth ad infinitum. But how can we help seeing that the essence of duration is to flow? It's a stream. Time is flow, and that the fixed placed side by side with the fixed will never constitute anything which has duration, which has time. It is not the states. It's not the states. Simple snapshots we have taken once again along the course of change that are real. On the contrary, it is flux, the continuity of transition. It is change itself that's real. Here, anyway. What we have here is merely an interpreted thrust of change, of a change always adhering to itself, to a direction of flow beyond us. I've added that. What's this direction of flow? In a duration which extends indefinitely. We live in, and another way of thinking about that is we live in a factical everyday state of magicking, a permanence. All is the fluxing, growing towards somewhere actually that's not here in the intellect that is. And this place actually ultimately is at peace. But this becoming here, you've got a fake solidity, fake states, and the illusion that's presented to us that everything appears solid and in modernity and known and sorted. There's no unknown. But the truth is, when you get closer to the ground of things, it's a becoming and a flow. But beyond that, it's a flowing towards an actual peace of an archetype, because Christ is at the end of time, right? Heaven's at the end of time. He is the future. Anyway, so Henry Bergson invites us to grasp the agent of growth in action instead of occupying ourselves with fossilized products. You can disclose him. He invites us to experience what he calls intuition, that which is below the appearances of how the world appears to you. And we've described what intuition is before. And it requires a moral process to disclose that, becoming that divine instinct, that and beyond revelation. And the person that talked about the Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who I think was a father, a priest, a scientific priest. This is interesting because we talked about the Omega point earlier, so it's worth putting this in because it speaks to this development. In the last page of his journal, he wrote this, what I believe, before he died. 1, St. Paul, the 3 verses, en passi panta theos. 2, cosmos, cosmogesis, biogenesis, new genesis, Christogenesis. 3, the 2 articles of my creed. The 3 verses are from Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. The last enemy to be destroyed is death, for he, the Christ, has put all things into subjection under his feet. When all things are subjected to him, then the Son himself will also be subjected to him who put all things under him, that God may be everything to everyone. And passi panta theos. And what does that mean? Because the hymn's not capitalized. Well, actually, I'm not necessarily sure that means that now. I put my interpretation in there. Because I need to double check that the caps is not in there. But my interpretation was that what that means is if you subject everything to him, then he joins you. Well, I'm just going to say what I've written here. This is theosis. The Son will help him, will serve him, you, from above, will to service, will wash your feet, which he will be, and that subjects everything to his throw. If we all do that, subjects everything to Christ, and then he'll enter you and everyone else inside with man, is a way you can interpret that. But I think that's all I'll say there on that, because I think I may have. I need to double check it. But my friends, that's it for this lecture on the kingdom of man. Next week we're going to be talking about the kingdom of God as the final lecture of these 3 lectures that have mapped the true development in opposition to what scientism presents, and I think is in a pretty damn convincing way that can help as a preparation for getting out of that false certainty of the modernistic worldview, because all of this is about a preparation for you to begin the practices of Christian mysticism, to begin these things, to begin. Everyone is to aspire to be a saint. So, although you're always a son and you're always a sinner, we must all go through purification, elimination, union. Man, this is a very important part to begin to recognize that the narrative we've been sold is wrong about how we developed, because those contradictions will be there. So, but all things will be explained. All things make sense. Ultimately, it just requires a lot of thinking to get around it. And also, I mean, we need to also look to the scientific evidence to say, well, hang on, what's interpretation here and what's the fact? What's the actual observed fact? And then we can extrapolate how that fits into the actual picture, not how scientism creates its false picture based on its psychological disposition, actually, or desires, or lusts, or what suits the people who postulate them. And so that's everything we have today. We'll jump over to the Discord. I'll read the chats now as well, don't worry. I'm looking at the chats now, friends, and we will go over for those who are members and have a chat in the Discord after. But of course, feel free to send anything through now, and I'll read it. So what do we have here? A rare appearance for me in one of these streams because of time zones. God bless Scott and all. Thank you, my friend. His name is just Dot. It's period and a black, so I don't... Yeah, it would be good if you could go into depth about AI. I use it sometimes as an alternative to Google search engine to find easy and straightforward answers to niche questions. But then again, search engines are a form of AI. Where is the limit? Yeah, these are things I've also thought about because I use a search engine as well. So there is I just need to contemplate it more. All I know is that the actual using ChatGPT is something I've been led not to do, at least for anything that I've been operating on. I'd have to ask more specifically about it and contemplate more specifically about it as to why that is. I don't have an intellectual theory as to why. I have a guess. There's definitely an ontological difference with it. Yeah. All right, everyone. Thank you for listening. I'll see you tomorrow, guys, for a 5-hour live stream from another beautiful location, probably in the North Shore of Sydney, but I'm going to contemplate on that. I'm not going to make the choice about where we're going to go. I'm going to ask. And so, yeah, we'll be on another live stream. I'm not 100% sure what we'll be talking about, but in a beautiful Sydney and New South Wales and beyond is where we'll be. So that'll start at 12 p.m., about 3 hours before where we are now for internationals is when that stream will start. 12 p.m. Eastern Australian Eastern Time. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Thanks for listening. I hope that was good, and I hope it will be fruitful for you in preparation for getting practical. That's all these lectures are about. It's getting practical and breaking out of the thought regime, back to tradition, back to the essence of things.